Hey guys, I might just quickly start, maybe just with introductions and things like that. So my name is Fong Track. So you and I will be spending the next hour together between 6 and 7. And if you make it through, we'll be spending the next 5 weeks of Tuesdays together. Um, the boot camp that we're about to kick off tonight it's delivered in 5 modules, and it aims to cover everything you need to know about CCS in the most practical way. Now, before we kind of get started, I just wanted to just give just announce some general housekeeping. So first of all, I actually just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for registering and joining me for the next hour. I do want to thank you for joining this afternoon, but I also wanted to say thank you on behalf of my team and to thank you for doing what you do within the industry. It's sometimes it can feel unappreciated. I can certainly tell you that everything that you guys do just by way of educating children and the next generation of children is greatly appreciated by myself and my team. This is why kind of Owner exists. Tonight's not specifically about Owner, but I just did want to say thank you on behalf of my team to the industry broadly. And now the session tonight, the intent of this boot camp over the next 5 weeks is that we've acknowledged that there's been a lot of change in the industry. Now, our way of trying to provide back or educate people that are, I guess, providers that are new to the industry, or directors that are new to the industry, or educators who are trying to take that next step to learn and understand CCS. This is who it's for. So if you've had experience and substantial experience with CCS, some of the stuff that we cover tonight and over the course of the next 5 weeks may not be necessarily new information, but we wanted to take this all the way back and probably just rebuild the understanding of CCS from the foundations upwards. So that's who the audience is specifically for tonight. But I do hope you do take some value out of it. You are investing an hour tonight, and if you choose to return, I'd love for you to return. If you choose to return, then I do hope you get some value out of it. Now, in terms of questions for tonight, I've got a little bit of content to get through. Now, as my team, they're actually on the chat available as well. So pop your questions into the chat. I'll try to answer some of them as I go along. But I might miss some. I have flagged with my team that are on here as well to highlight anything that you'd like me to kind of answer. If we don't get through all the questions tonight, I'm more than happy to respond post-session. Now, as you would have saw just a little bit earlier, this session is being recorded tonight. So if you do get some value and you do want to watch this again, or if you wanted to share this with some of your other team members, we will be distributing a link to the webinar tonight, along with some of the slides that we've got as well. So don't feel obliged to take notes all the way through. We will try to provide you as much information as you go along. Listen with intent is probably the best way to take something out of this session tonight. So look, as I said, tonight is the first session out of 5. Tonight's session is actually broken up into 2 sections. So session 1 tonight, we're going to take you through what is CCS, and then section 2 of it is going through the key things you need to know when you're setting up a service. Okay, so again, most of you, if you are providers, then you've already gone through that process again, so nothing new specifically for you there. Session 2 next week, so it's talking about how to administer CCS. Session 3, managing and reporting sessions of care. Session 4, how the childcare subsidy is actually paid. And session 5 is about record keeping and kind of best practices as well. So look, out of the 5 sessions, here's a straight up confession for you. Tonight's session might be the dry session of the 5. Okay, so if you make it through tonight and you have incredible patience, I'll know you work in the right industry, because you can certainly demonstrate a lot of patience through that. So again, I'm about to kick off, so I do again want to acknowledge and say thank you for joining me tonight, and I'm just going to kick off. So the Complete CCS Bootcamp, Session 1, the core components of CCS and how they work. So now, just before I jump on, I'm going to trust that you can see my screen. Hopefully you can see my screen. And number 2, you can actually hear me as well. So if you can't, do me a favor and just pop a message into the chat, and we'll see what we can do. I haven't heard any complaints yet about people not being able to hear or see. So we might just kick off there. So section 1 of tonight's session is what is childcare subsidy? Now, by the end of this session, you should be able to answer the following questions. So why is CCS provided? What is CCS made up of? How is eligibility determined for a child? When does the gap kick in? What causes the CCS amount to change? Why is withholding of payment important? And how much is withholding amount normally? So by the end of the first section, and hopefully maybe in about 20, 25 minutes, we can probably try to recap on some of this stuff. But my aim for you tonight, my aim to convey is to provide you at least the answers to this during the session. Okay, so let's kick off. So what's the childcare subsidy? So now CCS was launched in 2018 and it's designed to help make early learning and childcare more accessible for a large number of Australian families. So it ultimately is to reduce childcare costs to enable families to kind of get back to work. Now, the key thing to understand there is it's either, and when I say work, I'd say probably reframe that and say it's work or related activities, because the fundamental reason of why CCS exists is because, and the way that it's made up is based on families' income and their activity levels. Okay, so, and we'll go on and we'll talk about what activity levels are in a moment. But if you think about it in the lens of full-time work or study or registered voluntary work as well. So, but we'll get that back. We'll get onto that in a moment. Now, only services approved for CCS can use the subsidies under family assistance law. Now, it's worth noting that a provider is not directly involved in the calculation of a family's entitlements. And again, we'll go through entitlements and things like that and eligibility. But it's very important that providers understand the rules relating to CCS so they can discuss that with families, amount of the fee reduction and the gap that parents will actually end up paying, right? So now CCS typically is paid to providers who then pass it on to families. Families then pay the gap fee, okay? So that's in very simple terms. If you think about your daily fee, CCS, the difference between those is your parents' gap fees. Now, that used to be very kind of black and white, but as you would know or can appreciate, we've got the state-based funding in there as well. So if you're in New South Wales, you have Start Strong. So that all happens before the actual gap payment itself, right? But if we think about CCS in very simplistic terms at the moment, it's fee, CCS ends up being your gap fee. Now, CCS itself is made up of 3 main parts, okay? So number 1 is eligibility, and we'll go through that in a moment. 2, the amount of CCS payments, and I'm going to put that under the bucket of what we call entitlements. And number 3 is the types of childcare and sessions of care. Okay, so the key differentiation point there is what we call the hourly cap, and that's very different from an early education service and an OSH provider. It also is dependent on the age of the child as well. Okay, so that's kind of what, just to recap, CCS was launched in 2018, designed to make childcare a lot more affordable for Australian families. Now, it is a legal requirement for families to provide the most true and complete information to Services Australia for the purposes of claiming CCS, as well as notify Services Australia of changes in circumstances. So the changes in circumstances can be anything like the change in income. So a family may have changed from full-time work to part-time work and vice versa, therefore changing the amount of the family income, and also changes to the activity as well. So you might have gone from studying to full-time work, and that could adjust the amount of hours CCS is applicable for as well. Now, as a provider, it's helpful to understand this, and providers should encourage families to ensure information is up to date and accurate. Now, I will touch on why that's important at the later end of this specific this section, but we'll talk about things like, withholding and family debt and things like that can arise if the information is not updated with CCS in a timely way. So Now, as I said, there's 3 criteria taken into account when considering the eligibility of a child or a family for CCS. Now, in terms of eligibility, we're talking about number 1, age requirements. So child needs to be under the age of 13 and also not attending a secondary school. There are immunization requirements. Now, to be eligible for CCS, a child must also meet immunization requirements, okay? Now, this does mean children must be immunized according to the standard vaccination schedule, or have an approved exemption from being immunized. So these are all the things, these 3 things are addressed when the family goes through and applies for CCS for the very first time. Now, the last one there is around residency requirements. Okay, so now in order to receive CCS, the parents, carer, or their partner must be an Australian citizen, a permanent resident living in Australia, or be exempted from the Australian government residency requirements. Now, the blanket comment I'll make on this one is, as a provider, eligibility is not something that you can actually influence. It's actually a direct matter between families and Services Australia or Centrelink. Okay, so it does require them to take the initiative to complete the necessary application with Services Australia. So it's nothing specifically you can actually do in order for families to be considered eligible for CCS. So let's now talk about entitlements. Now, this is a key one here because I gently touched on it earlier. So remember, we've just spoken through eligibility. Let's talk through the second part of CCS, which is entitlements. Okay. So the amount of CCS, the entitlement percentage, and the number of hours per fortnight is specifically what we're talking about. That's what we define as entitlements. Now, entitlements are based on 3 things. Number 1, family income. The best way to think about family income and how it relates to entitlements is this. Family income determines the percentage of CCS that a family will receive. Okay, now that's based on their family income, and we'll go into family income in the next couple of slides here. But that's what determines the percentage of CCS in the entitlements. Because remember, the entitlements are based on percentage and the number of hours. So income determines the percentage within the CCS entitlements. The activity test. So the activity test is the number of hours in a fortnight that an individual engaged in recognized activity. So again, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but the activity test itself determines the number of hours that are subsidized, all right? So we've gone from income, that determines the percentage. We've got the activity test, that determines how many hours a family or a child is eligible to have subsidized care in a fortnightly period. Then the last one there, guys, that's got to do with the entitlements, is the actual type of care itself. Now, again, we'll go into a little bit more detail about this, but this then starts to talk about things like the hourly cap. And then the hourly cap is probably something that's not as probably well known in terms of the CCS rule. So we'll go through a little bit about that tonight as well. I really hope everything is kind of making sense so far. So let's talk about family income. Now, this refers to the annual adjusted taxable income of the individual and their partner. So in very simple terms, it's the family income that's taken into consideration when determining how much the percentage of CCS that will be paid to a family. Now, the income level itself is split into kind of, well, they've simplified it. It used to be split into 6 buckets. It's now split into 3 buckets to determine the applicable CCS entitlement percentage. Okay, so what I might do is I'll start at the bottom here. So family income, where it's greater than 530,000, unfortunately, the family is not eligible for CCS or any kind of CCS in that vein. If the family income is between 80,000 and 530,000, the CCS percentage will vary between, say, 0% if you're at the top end of that, or 90% if you're at the lower end of that. Okay, so now for every $5,000 above 80,000, it's the CCS percentage goes down. So at $80,000 in terms of the family income, you'll receive 90% CCS. As soon as that hits, say 85, the percentage will drop down by 1%. So that'll go from 90% down to 89. If it goes to 90,000, it'll go to 88 as the, so that's kind of how you work that out. Now, the maximum amount of CCS. So this is before we start to talk about things like ACCS and things like that. But the maximum amount of CCS that a family can receive based on an income of a household income of $80,000 is 90%. Okay. So the key takeaway out of this, guys, is that family income or household income determines the percentage of CCS that a family is eligible for. The activity test. Okay, so the activity test, as I mentioned kind of earlier, determines how many hours how many subsidized hours of care a child can receive in a fortnight, right? So now, depending on the combined hours of work, training, study, recognized activities, and recognized activities can be anything along the lines of paid work, self-employment, unpaid work in a family business, looking for work, or recognized volunteering or study. That's what recognized activities are, okay? So a family can receive up to 100 hours of subsidy per fortnight per child. So in the case where you're greater than 48 hours of activity, you can get up to 100 hours of subsidized care. Okay, so if you marry that back up with here, so if you're earning anywhere between here and your activity is greater than 48 hours, you can have up to 100 hours of subsidized care. If your activity hours are between 16 and 48, then you can get 72 and so forth and kind of down the line there. So that's what the activity test is. Now, again, the activity test is part of the application process. So parents will then declare, once they go through the application process with CCS, parents go through and they kind of declare their income, and they also declare what kind of activity that they're participating in. So again, that could be full-time work or part-time work. Okay. Now, there are extra considerations that we should consider. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children have a minimum number of hours of care that they're eligible for, regardless of the activity test. The other consideration is people with disabilities or impairments are also eligible for a minimum number of subsidized care hours as well. So there are other exceptional circumstances that also play a part in this as well. Okay, so guys, what we've covered so far in just the quick part of just entitlements is income determines percentage, activity test determines the amount of hours that you receive in a fortnightly period for subsidized care. The hourly cap. So let's talk about the hourly cap. I'm going to pose a quick question just quickly out there. I know you're all muted, so you can't answer, but feel free to answer it in the chat. But CCS, in terms of a multiple choice question, is CCS paid to services or paid to families based on daily, weekly, or hourly? They're your three options. So A, B, or C. Karina, exactly right. It's hourly. So the CCS hourly rate cap is based on the upper limit of the amount of subsidized care provided at a service, right? So now this can vary between school age, below school age or school age. So if it's center-based care, the hourly cap is $13.73. Okay, so that's the upper limit of what CCS would pay. Now, the best example I can give you that is this. If your daily rate, for example, is $120 and you have a 10-hour session of care, your hourly rate is $12. Okay, so what that means for you then is if a family has 90% CCS entitlement, they'll receive 90% of that $12 per hour. And we haven't talked about withholding yet, but in very simple terms, they'll receive 90% of the $12. Now, in a different scenario, if your fee was, let's say, $140 a day over the course of a 10-hour session, that means your hourly rate is $14. And if we take the scenario where it's below school age and it's center-based care, the maximum CCS will pay is $13.73 per hour. So in the same scenario where that family receives 90% CCS entitlement, they'll receive 90%, not of the $14, but 90% of the $13.73. The difference between the $14 and the $13.73, so say the 27 cents, over the course of 10 hours, that's $2.70. That additional $2.70 goes towards the family's gap payment. Okay. So it's key to understand that CCS will only pay a maximum up to $13.73, or if you're in an FDC, up to $12.72. If it's in-home care per family, it's $37.34. Now for OSH services, it's $12.02 and things like that. So again, depending on the age. The biggest takeaway from this, guys, is where a provider charges less than the hourly cap, so less than the hourly cap, families will receive the applicable percentage of the actual fee charge. So like I said to you, 90% of the $12. Where a provider charges more than the hourly cap, families will receive the applicable percentage of the hourly rate cap. So in that case, you don't get 90% of the $14 per hour, you get 90% of $13.73. So when I say 90%, just replace that with whatever CCS percentage is applicable for that family. So I hope that makes sense. So in terms of the three things that we covered with entitlements, guys, it's income determines percentage, activity test determines hours, the hourly cap plays a huge part in how much CCS actually gets paid to families, because as I said, if your hourly rate is over this, you'll only get the maximum percentage of this amount, or if it's below that, it's 90% of, or sorry, whatever percentage it is multiplied by your hourly rate. So I just touched on, we just went through the scenario of, say, 90% of the hourly cap, things like that. Now, there's a topic that we usually talk about, and it's probably more misunderstood by not services, but maybe more by parents, I guess, and that's withholding of payments. Now, it's a common question that we actually get from families and things like that is, well, why don't I, if I get 90%, how come I don't get my full 90%? So there's withholding. Now, subsidy amounts are now the way CCS is determined, it's based on an estimate. Okay. Now, entitlements are provided to families based on the information they provide in the income and the activity. At the end of the financial year, the amounts paid and withheld will be reconciled. And what this means is, because CCS provides you an entitlement amount, let's call it, say, in this scenario, 50%, because that was based on the information you provided for income and for activity. At the end of that year, if your income is higher than what you actually stated, it's likely that you might, as the family might have incurred a CCS debt, which means they've paid you too much CCS, families, and now because of that overpayment, they start to withdraw payments back from you. Okay, so now the standard percentage that CCS apply to all families is 5%. So that means, back in that scenario where I said you receive 90% of the $12, if that's your hourly rate, of that 90%, you only receive 95% of that, because CCS holds the 5% difference. Okay, they withhold that because what they do at the end of the year is there's a process called balancing or reconciling. And that's where they say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, your income that you declared was $80,000 at the beginning of the year. It looks like when you've lodged your latest tax returns, it's about $100,000. You have now incurred X amount. Because of that, we overpaid you CCS. Now let's say that overpayment was, say, $5,000. Through the course of that year, they held back payments through withholding, and let's say they've held back $1,500, for example, in CCS. That means that family has a CCS debt of $3,500 to pay. Now, that withholding, that CCS debt, there's a couple of ways to pay that off. Families receive a notice via MyGov, and they'll receive a CCS bill, and they can actually just pay that directly straight out. The alternative way, and what most families do is, or what CCS does if the family doesn't respond, is that if that family continues to receive benefits via Services Australia, or more specifically CCS, CCS will continue to pay CCS to that family at the rate of, say, 90%, if that's what they're eligible for. But families won't get the full amount. So they won't get, already they won't get 5%, but they'll start to get, I believe the rule is half. So if they were getting, say, $90 a session of CCS, CCS will only pay out $45 to the family to help subsidize care, and they keep $45 until the debt's actually paid. So the purpose of withholding is to reduce the potential amount of debt that a family might incur with overpayments of CCS. Now, it also works the other ways, guys. If there was an underpayment of CCS. So again, in the reverse scenario, you've overestimated the amount of income and hours that you've worked or will be working, and it's coming a lot lower than that. Again, if they've withheld anything within that 5%, they'll pay that all back to you. And then what they do is then they recalculate what your CCS should have been through that year based on the declared income, and they actually pay that back in bulk or in a lump sum. Okay, so that's why withholding's there. It's to reconcile at the end of the CCS year whether or not that a family's been overpaid or underpaid CCS. Now, the standard, as I said, is 5%. Parents can actually adjust this. Okay, so here's the other thing that can change CCS from week to week. Families have the ability to adjust their CCS withholding twice a year. Then they can do it via MyGov. So they can adjust that from anywhere between 5% to close to 100%, which means if they withhold completely 100% of their CCS, that means the families won't be subsidized at all during that year. And then after they've declared their income, because everything was withheld, they receive all that the eligible CCS paid back to them in a lump sum. Okay, so parents do have the ability, or families do have the ability to adjust that 5%. And based on, depending on your CCS software, you can actually see that withholding, again, typically is 5%, but sometimes we just have to check that withholding because it can be manually adjusted. Hope that makes sense so far, guys. So let's talk about ACCS, and I'm going to more talk about ACCS specifically to more child wellbeing. Now, there are 4 types of ACCS. There's ACCS, child wellbeing, which is more applicable to you guys. There's ACCS for grandparents. There's ACCS, temporary financial hardship. ACCS, transition to work. Now, the only one that you can influence in this is the child wellbeing one. Okay, all the other 3 need to be determined and assessed by Centrelink. Now, ACCS, as it stands for, it's additional subsidy over and above what they already receive in CCS. Now, I've got a table in the next. Now, I've got a table in the next slide over. But basically, if a child is eligible for ACCS, regardless of what percentage that that's on their profile, I guess, or what they're eligible for CCS. So let's say it's 50%, and let's say they are eligible for 50 hours of care across the fortnight. If the child under child wellbeing is eligible, and in all of these scenarios, if they have been approved, their their CCS percentage entitlement changes from 50% to 100. So that's completely subsidized care. And their hours go from 50 to 120 hours of care. The other thing that changes, my friends, is the hourly cap also changes for them as well. So you recall that the hourly cap for center-based care is $13.73. For an ACCS child or anyone that's eligible for ACCS, the hourly cap increases by 20%. So that $13.73, I think it becomes just over $16 per hour of care. Okay, so they're the three things that kind of change. Now, it's important to note that if you recognize a child or a family that may be eligible for further assistance, then you can actually put that through yourself. You can either do that through the provider entry portal, the PEP, or your childcare software that you're using, all right? But it's important to know that providers are all involved in identifying children who require extra support through ACCS child wellbeing, but you're not directly involved in any of the other ACCS, the other types of ACCS, okay? Now, for child wellbeing, a provider must submit an ACCS certificate to start assessing ACCS for a child. Now, if as a provider you recognize that this child is in specific need of additional care because they are at risk, you can apply for what's called an ACCS certificate. An ACCS certificate lasts for 6 weeks. So that then, once approved, automatically changes their entitlements from what it was to having the 100 hours and 100% subsidized and 120 hours of care. That can last for 6 weeks. Now, you are required to keep a record or any evidence that supports that consideration for that child to be at risk in case Services Australia or Department of Education require that information as evidence. Now, while the certificate, the ACCS certificate is in effect, the higher CCS subsidy rate will be paid, okay? An ACCS certificate can only be applied to a child. So this is the 6-week period. So the 6-week period, that's only applicable once in a 12-month period for that particular child. So that's step one. If you see that a child is at risk, you can apply for what's called an ACCS certificate. It lasts for 6 weeks. Now, if you feel as though that child after the 6 weeks is still at risk, you can apply for what's called an ACCS determination. Now, an ACCS determination lasts for 13 weeks, and you can reapply for that at the end of the 13 weeks. However, the obligation as a provider, you'll need to provide evidence or statutory declaration where third-party evidence is not available to support this, okay? So the evidence is key. Now, the evidence, if you do have it, has to be less than 6 months old from the commencement date of the determination. Okay, now just to quickly recap, 2 things with ACCS, or let's call it 3. ACCS child wellbeing is something that you can influence and you can apply for on behalf of the child and on behalf of the family. The first step is getting an ACCS certificate that lasts for 6 weeks. The second step is an ACCS determination if you feel that child is continuing to be at risk. That, again, goes for 13 weeks. That can then be applied for at the end of the 13 weeks, can be reapplied for. Okay, so now ACCS is only applicable to your service as well. So that, if that child then suddenly goes to another service, they'll have to reapply for ACCS under that service. Okay, so they'll have to go through the same thing as well, unless it falls into one of these buckets. If it's an ACSS for grandparents and they go to another service, that's already part of the entitlements and that just follows the child. But if it's a child well-being circumstance, it's not one of those things where because they're eligible for 100 hours here, they're not eligible to go to another service and be eligible for 100 hours, 100% and 120 hours on the other side. Okay, so that's ACCS. I won't go too far into this one now. This table just shows the ACCS levels and rates, and on top of the normal regular CCS. I mentioned earlier that the maximum CCS hourly rate for center-based care is $13.73. Families will be able to access a subsidy of up to 120% of this rate, or $16.48 per hour if the actual fee charged by the service is over the standard CCS hourly cap rate. So let's say your fee was $150 for a 10-hour session. It's $15. CCS will actually pay a percentage up until $16.48 for this child. But again, only specifically applicable to ACCS. ACS, CCS, child wellbeing. Can you give examples? Yeah, we can. Let me just bring it up. I can tell you specifically. I'll give you, just bear with me for one moment. Okay, so child wellbeing can be any of the following, but potentially not limited to this as well. So serious physical, emotional, or psychological abuse. Now, this is all directly out of the CCS handbook, okay? Sexual abuse, domestic or family violence, and the last one is, in broad terms, is neglect. So they're the 4 buckets that's defined in the CCS handbook as what's defined under child wellbeing. Look, we've gone through quite a bit there. Now, in terms of CCS, there's 10 steps to it. Okay, so step 1 is around determining the eligibility for a family. Again, only families can do that through their application with Centrelink or Services Australia. The key determinant in the entitlements is family income and the activity test, and for you as a provider is understand the hourly cap. Now, step 5, again, depending on your sessions, because the things that you can influence are your daily rate and the session of care. So that's what determines your hourly cap. So just be mindful of that. Compare the hourly cap as determined by Services Australia, sorry, by the Department of Education, and your hourly rate. You can then use that information to calculate the total sessions in the hour. From that information, you can then calculate based on the family's entitlement. You can work out what the entitlement is, the withholding amount, the subsidy that might be paid or estimated to be paid to you, and then you can work out what the gap fee is. Now, I've gone through that in pretty quick steps, but again, I will distribute this at the end of post this session. So please, you don't need to take specific notes on that, but there's kind of like 10 steps to kind of go through when you're trying to understand or determine CCS on behalf of a family. My friends, we've made it to section 2. For everyone that's still here, we started off with just over 50 people. Now we've got 67. So I'm hoping most of you have actually stayed on. Thank you for staying on, by the way. Look, the second section tonight, again, it's not as long as the first section. So this is more talking about the key things to know when you're setting up your service. Again, for those that are already in the industry, again, this may not specifically be targeted towards you, but it's probably a good refresher. But look, by the end of this session, you should be able to answer the following. What is the CCS? What's the purpose of the provider entry point, the PEP? What do you need PROTA? Do I need to invest in childcare management software or system? And why is invoicing families using estimated fee reduction not recommended? So they're the key things that, the key questions you'd be able to answer post this section. So look, in very simple terms, the CCSS is the childcare subsidy system. It's the system used by Services Australia to administer payments of CCS and ACCS and support a range of management functions. So that's what it does. Now, the system holds the necessary records, including details of providers, their staff, and children using each service, and uses enrollment and session data to calculate and make payments. Now, a provider will need to pass information to the CCS system. This can be done using childcare software or through base systems provided by Australia. So what that means, guys, is what this chart is showing is how to interact with the CCS system. Okay, so as a provider, you can use a childcare software, so be it Owner, Quick Kids, Explore, whoever else. That uses Proda to identify who that is, and then that engages with the childcare system. The alternative way a provider can engage with the childcare system is directly via Proda. So you log into Proda, and then you log into the provider entry point. So here's a confession. If you chose to be a provider of an early education service, you don't actually have to use childcare software in order to meet your obligations. You don't. You can use the PEP, and the PEP allows you to submit your sessions as normal. There's obviously various different reasons why you would use specific childcare software, because you might be looking at certain other features that help with your compliance. But in all honesty, if you didn't want to use childcare software, you can actually just lodge all your sessions via the PEP. It's a little bit manual, to be honest, but there is an option there. In terms of how families interact with the CCS system, is they log in via MyGov, and they've just got to link their Centrelink account. Now, this MyGov and the connection to Centrelink is key. It's key in the sense that we quite often get a lot of families that will tell us they haven't received any information from CCS. They believe they've been approved for CCS and their eligibility has all been approved. Every bit of communication around the CCS gets fed back into MyGov. And there's a little messages toggle as you go into it, and it'll tell you, yes, you've received CCS, or you have a CCS debt, or you have this outstanding in order before CCS eligibility can be actually granted. Okay, so that's how families kind of determine. That's how families interact with CCS. Now, again, as I said to you, the key thing to remain compliant, I guess, as a provider, is you've got to be able to record attendances and absences. You've got to be able to provide statement of entitlements, invoices, and receipts, things like that. Okay, so again, the PEP system allows you to do that without childcare software. But obviously, if you're using childcare software, then you're probably potentially looking for other things that you might want to do with the system. But in very short form, the CCS system is just the actual system that administers payments, receives sessions, creates enrollments, and things like that. Now, what's Proda? We get this question a lot too, but Proda is essentially it's a way for the Australian government, or for the way for you to interact with an Australian government system. It's an identity system, guys. It's an online system to use to verify your person's digital identity. If you have a Proda login, that follows you forever. Okay, so if you worked at one service and you go to another service, that doesn't change. Your Proda login is the same. The ability for you to do things from one service to another will then determine is based on what access the new provider gives you. But Proda is the same. It doesn't expire, and it does follow you. Okay, so but Proda we often hear the term Proda kind of get thrown around interchangeably with what we call the provider entry point. Proda is your access into the provider entry point, number one. or Proda is kind of the identification system that links your childcare software into the childcare management system. Sorry, into the childcare system. Okay, so think about Proda as just an online ID verification. Now, what's the provider entry point? In a very dry sense, the provider entry point is the online interface that providers can use to sign in and access the CCS system. So as I said before, you don't have to use childcare software specifically to do what you need to do in order to maintain a certain level of compliance for your service. Okay, so now if you're a provider waiting for the outcome of the assessment of their application, you might want to let families know that you are currently seeking approval to operate for the purposes of CCS. Okay. Now, before I get too far into that, I apologize. I did jump around a little bit there. Now, providers can use the PEP to do a range of different things. So they can access, obtain childcare software activation codes. So again, if you're using, say, Owner or Explore or whatever the case might be, every service asks you to create what's called a B2B device, and that's what connects the software to, on behalf of you to the childcare software. You can add and remove relevant staff. You can create ACCS certificates and determinations. So there's a whole host of things you can do as part of the PEP. Now, just back on the topic of so I'm just going to reread this one. So if you're a provider waiting for the outcome of your CCS assessment of your application for CCS, just let families know that you currently are seeking approval to operate for the purposes of CCS. Now, as we all know, as providers in the industry, you know that there's no definite time frame for the assessment to occur. Now, once approved, providers, you may choose to continue using the PEP to submit your childcare data. However, that you might also be able to use an approved childcare software. So once you're approved for CCS, you can do what we call create a B2B device, and your software can connect into the childcare management software directly for you without having to go via the actual PEP itself. Now, approved childcare software may offer additional functionality to the basic functions of the PEP. Owner itself is where we're approved as a CCS provider, but we also offer you things outside of just CCS, like rostering, invoicing, vacancy management, payroll, and advanced reporting and things like that. So again, they're the things that don't directly come out of the PEP. Other software providers also provide you the same thing as well, but that's why you would use something outside of just the actual PEP itself. Billing methods, my friends, this one's always a little bit controversial. So there's typically 3 billing methods. And I want to start with probably the end game first. And this is what specifically is outlined in the CCS handbook. The department doesn't recommend you estimating CCS for families. Okay, so I'm going to put that one out there. I know the reasons why, and I can appreciate all the reasons why services estimate CCS. I can appreciate it all. But if I'm going by the handbook, they don't recommend you estimate CCS. But let's go through the various billing methods. So let's talk billing arrears. So billing in arrears is when services choose to bill after the period has passed and the CCS has been paid to your account. Now, this does ensure parents are only paying the exact gap fee. So in a real practical sense, what billing in arrears means is this week is the week starting the 20th. What you'll be doing is billing for the last week. So the 13th through to the end of the 13th. So end of last week, which was the 19th. You'd be billing the 18th. Yeah, so you'd be billing from the 12th to the 18th. So that you're billing for last week. Okay, so that's what's billing in arrears. You're not guessing the amount. So, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they attended two sessions. The total fee is $200. You received $100 back from CCS. Your gap fee is $100. There's no ambiguity around estimating what you would receive from CCS. Okay. So that is a recommended billing method proposed by CCS. Now, if you choose to bill in advance, they recommend the department recommends to not estimate. Now, how this works, guys, is it's effectively a combination of billing in advance and in arrears at the same time. So what it means is this. So let's say we just started this week. It's the week of the 20th, and you've got a family, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They're due to come 2 days this week, and their normal fee for this week is $200. What the department is saying is, cool, that's $200. They also attended last week. I'll pay you CCS, last week's CCS, this week. Let's say it's $100. You didn't guess it. We know that's how much we've paid you for last week. The family gap fee is $100. Now, to kickstart that process, though, it requires you to bill the family in full for the very first week. Okay? So when I start at your service, the very first week, I attend two sessions in that week. I have to pay full fee for that very first week. So $200 is what I pay you. Come the next week, I attend the same two sessions. It's $200 again as my normal fee. But because I earned CCS or am due to receive CCS for the previous week that I paid in full, that $100 then comes in the next week. So it's $200 of the current week, 1 week of CCS from the past. My bill from then onwards, in theory, is $100 all the way through. Okay, so that's billing in advance with no estimating. It's a combination of in advance and in arrears at the same time. But it does require on the very first week families to pay in full for the very first week of invoicing or fortnightly, on depending on how you bill. Now, the most common practice that we have, and to be frank with you, it's probably the one that probably drives a lot of the inquiries you might have. Okay, and that's billing in advance and estimating. So billing in advance and estimating essentially means this. I'm attending 2 sessions this week. My entitlement is 50%. Let's not talk about withholding for a second. I should get $100 from the government. Therefore, services charge me $100. That works in practice. Now, a couple of things could throw that estimate off. One of them is I might book in a casual day. Now, depending on when you bill, let's say you bill on a Monday for that week, and you estimate the payment and you take a payment on Tuesday, whatever the case might be. I then go and book in a casual day at the end of the week, that week on the Thursday. Technically, I've attended three days in that week. I should be charged $300, but you've only billed me $100 so far. It's fine. This will catch up the next week, because at the end of that week, you'll submit sessions for 3 attendances and you'll get extra CCS. But come the following week, I'm still attending 2 sessions. I'll have to, as a parent, I have to remember that I actually attended an extra session last week, because that's going to carry over into my invoice for the following week. So that does throw parents off a little bit, because things can happen in the sense that things can change and they don't understand why their bills aren't consistent. The other thing that can happen, guys, I touched on it a little bit earlier, is around balancing and CCS debt and things like that. When you estimate, you're estimating based on a child's entitlement. So that 50%, you are assuming that you're going to get 50% of that fee. But if they've got a CCS debt, or if their entitlements actually change between fortnights, because you've estimated at a specific point in time, and that changes, the following week you thought you were going to get $100, but you only got $80 because there was either CCS debt or the family's entitlements changed. You then have to go back to the parent, and again, your system will do this. It will add another $20 to what they owe you for the following week. So it all comes out in the wash to a degree, but you kind of can spend a little bit of time trying to administer and try to convey an understanding of the method and see how CCS works to families. So it's completely up to you. The most common practice is billing in advance, but just based on my experience and my team's experience, billing in arrears and billing in advance with no estimating have substantially less inquiries from families about why is my bill X, Y, and Z. But On the flip side, I can very much appreciate why you choose to bill in advance and estimate. Guys, we're almost there. Wow, almost 2 minutes to spare. So look, just to recap quickly on the two sections that we've gone through tonight. Eligibility for CCS is determined by the child's age, immunization status, and the parent's residency. The takeaway from that is you as a provider or educator cannot do anything specifically about this process at all. They have to go and apply, and they have to go through that process. We'll go through eligibility statuses in the coming weeks. CCS entitlements are determined by the family's income, activity type, and the type of childcare service. Okay. So remember, income determines percentage, activity determines hours, hourly cap rate is what's applicable to the type of childcare service. 4 types of ACCS. The one that you can influence is the child wellbeing one. There's child wellbeing with, child grandparent ACCS, temporary financial hardship, and transition to work. The CCSS uses PRODA, PEP, and MyGov to administer subsidies to providers who then pass that on to families. Services, my friends, you can choose to bill in advance or in arrears, and the department does not recommend estimating CCS, but again, we can all appreciate why. There's a question in the chat that I'll just answer quickly. CCS confirmed, but no percentage applied. That, again, if it's no percentage, guys, it's an income test. As soon as you see no percentage and you see hours, it's something to do with the income test. So the only guidance you can provide to families at that point is please speak to Centrelink and declare your income. The opposite can happen as well, guys. If they might have a percentage, but they have 0 hours, that's related to the activity test. So they're missing that. So that's the conversation they need to have with Centrelink. The other suggestion there can be vaccination status. It can be a whole host of things. But if you see 0% or 0 hours, it's to do with one of those things. If you made it this far, thank you for the hour. Next week's sessions is we're going to talk about how to administer CCS, and we're going to talk specifically about enrollments. The following session after that is we're going to be talking about sessions of care. The one after that, session number 4, is how CCS is paid. We're going to talk about entitlements, payments, reconciliations. And if you make it that far, guys, just before Christmas, we're going to do record keeping and notifications. That's what we've got on the cards for next week. I've checked the numbers there. It's gone down to 64. I'm still pretty happy that we've got 64 people on here with me. But, just quickly on next week, how to administer CCS. The specific ones we're going to be talking about is what are the enrollment stages, when special arrangements need to be made based on the requirement of care, what to do when administering enrollments, and understand the different types of enrollment statuses. So that's what we'll dig into next week. I look forward to seeing you all again. It's again the last minute that I've got with you. I'm already over time. I do want to thank you for spending the last hour with me. I know it's 7 o'clock and you're probably keen to get home after a long day, but thank you for making this worthwhile. I'd love some feedback. If it's not useful, if you want more information, please reach out and we'll do the best we can. But my friends, I won't keep you too longer. Thank you so much for tonight, and I hope you got some value out of it. Thank you.